name is Joe Tracy. I'm the chair of the Heritage Boat Association at the moment. The reason we're here is that we are starting a month-long cruise through the Erne system. We annually go somewhere as a group, and this year it's to the Erne. As we travel from here, Riversdale, on the canal system, and we go to Belturbet. We go from Belturbet the following weekend to the Lough Erne Yacht Club, and the weekend after that we go to Baleek. From Baleek we come back to wrap the whole thing up to Enniskillen itself, to the town centre. People come into these kind of boats through various means, foolishness, and young people go and buy one, or people they pass down through families or whatever. It's a different type of boating. The boats in this particular campaign are a mishmash of old Irish trading boats, of some Dutch boats, some old wooden boats.
While most of the boats in the heritage fleet are the old cargo boats, canal boats, there are a number of other heritage boats, including some timber boats. And this boat here is Vicky May. She was built in 1930 on the Norfolk Broads. She cruises with the heritage fleet all over the country. Well, the boat itself would have been built as a hire cruiser, and you could hire her out with or without a crew. And at that time she would have had a rear saloon where there was the master's cabin and a porcelain bath. But that was taken off during the war, the Second World War, because she was used as a river patrol boat. Well, most of us have real jobs, but we would spend the summer, and our summer sort of runs from Patrick's Day through to November. Within that we would take a few full weeks or fortnights on the boat. But outside those periods, every weekend virtually we'd be on the boat because we'd be cruising on some waters.
The Eames boat was built in 1911 in Holland, Dutch barge, originally built to transport turf along the coastline and up the canals, brought over in 1965 by John Johnson, converted in 67. John owned it for, I think, about 25 years, then Paul and Emer, a couple from England, had it for another 24 years, I think, and we've had it for roughly 8. We'd lived for a couple of months, maybe from about April onwards to late September, early October. We'd be using the boat weekends or any time we have. Well, originally when we came down we were with a number of barges and they were all heritage boats. But when we bought the Eames 1911, she is a heritage boat in her own right. So a lot of the boats that are older boats get involved, and some of the younger boats as well. So it's a good organisation. So each summer we usually head along the waterways and suss out a bit of social awareness for ourselves.
Well, the Changsha, as far as we know, is the oldest boat on the Irish Inland Waterways system, built sometime around 1846, we think on the Clyde in Scotland. Built originally for the Grand Canal, for one of the directors of the Grand Canal, a gentleman called Sankey, and he would have used it as his own boat for many years. And then it changed hands over the years. It was in the hands of a Lloyd family from Elphin in County Roscommon for a number of years. In the middle of the 1920s, it was sold to a family called Delaney, who went on and eventually to found the Inland Waterways Association in the 1950s. Around that time the boat belonged to a gentleman called Sid Shine, quite a famous musician from the Athlone area. A number of years later it ended up in the hands of Simon Crowe, the drummer with the Boomtown Rats, another famous musician from another generation. And then after a couple more owners, we bought it in 1988. The boat is actually older than some of the canals in the country, including the Ulster Canal. But even the Shannon Navigation, as we know and love it today, that was really only built in the 1840s, so it dates to the same period as the boat. So the boat is kind of part of the history of the waterways in a very, very direct way. No, there's no ghosts on the boat that we know of, at least we've never heard any, but as I say, there's a lot of very interesting people connected with it, and we sort of feel in many ways that their spirit is still with us a lot of the time, you know, but they're benign spirits.
.35M is on the fourth phase of her life, if you like, with us as a pleasure boat. Started out as a cargo boat, and those boats were, as you know, often referred to as the Guinness boats. She carried all sorts of household goods, grain, building materials and general hardware from the canals down through the Shannon system. Sometime in the mid-50s she was converted to a workboat, and she was fitted with a dredger, and she worked maintaining the system for something like 8 to 10 years, and we bought her in 1992. Well, the M boats were built primarily by Vickers in Dublin and also by the Liffey dockyard. And the Liffey dockyard was run by William Macmillan, so a small number of the boats were built by that dockyard, and they're known colloquially as the Macmillan boats. 35M, which was built in 1927, was one of those Macmillan boats. And coincidentally, last year, William Macmillan's grandson found us on the web, and he and his wife came to Dublin and had the pleasure of taking a trip on our boat. And for us, the great bonus was that he gave us a signed photo of his granddad, which sits proudly on 35M. But we've been very well rewarded with 35M. The great thing about it is you can use it in all weathers. It's well insulated, has a fire, and we've used it with snow on the roof and had nice cozy evenings on it.
I purchased 4E 30 years ago. 4E is one of a rare breed. It's the iconic horse boat on canals, the picture you see in country areas of the horse pulling the boat. So 4E was built in 1895. The boat was built and owned by the Grand Canal Company, and they would have had an infrastructure of stables and horses. From about 1910 onwards, the company made a decision that they would motorise fleet, and they picked 30 of their horse boats, and this was one of them. It became 23M and got a Bollender engine. The engine on the bow is a single-cylinder Swedish Bollender, start of the 1900s, and these engines were put in barges in this country, lots of them in England as well, right up until the late 1930s, and then more modern engines sort of took over. The Bollender that's on the bow of 4E at the moment is part of a collection that was donated to the Heritage Boat Association for their use and study, I suppose.
Well, we always try to interact with the local communities and the towns and villages along the waterways. And in lots of places there would have been families whose grandparents, even parents sometimes, would have worked on the commercial waterways in those days. So it's great to meet those people, and we can bring the floating heritage to the people heritage.
These boats are hard work to restore, but very rewarding when you get them out on either a dry evening or a wet evening. They certainly have many a story to tell in their later lives about, but all of which has to stay on tour, obviously.
The Shannon is the community in itself. So you have a lot of people coming from around the country, all over, and you know every time you go into a harbour, the first thing you do is who's in the harbour, and then you get together, you have a couple of drinks, get the food out, or you might go to a restaurant. And I think when people get in here and they see what's involved, they're hooked.